Welcome in and welcome back to another edition of The Legacy Right. I am the legacy of Jennifer and Kaiser. My number two, number one, whatever you want to call them, Star Trek references as well as number two references, because we joke on this matter right here.
Yeah.
Andrew Joseph, and we got yet another special guest for you. But before we bring them in and get started truly, we got to do the plug, Andrew. We have to do the
Absolutely.
plug. It's
Cut
it's
the
our
promo.
it's our little well, yeah, it's our little promo, right? So we're all wrestling fans here, right, Andrew? So
Yeah.
fanghornforesters.com for all your woodworking needs and necessities. Just a small little business my cousin's trying to start, trying to get on that entrepreneur spirit and do something away from the auspices of the state, right? So for all your woodworking needs, necessities, and millwork, mobile millwork, he'll come to you, fanghornforesters.com. Now let's get to the show. So, welcome into Per Bylund, probably a man in our audience that probably doesn't need any introduction. But, sir, if you want to give an introduction to yourself and all your exploits and
All my exploits. Are you sure about
all
that?
your ex all your exploits and all your yeah, I'm having serious brain fog on trying to gather up words. So,
Okay.
so.
Yeah, I mean, very briefly, I'm associate professor of entrepreneurship at Oklahoma State. I'm also a senior fellow with the Mises Institute, where I have been writing columns since I think the first one is was published in 2002, maybe 2004,
Mhm.
something like that. I have been let's see, I took the step to anarchism in '98. And I recall that very clearly because I was struggling with how to get rid of the last pieces of the state, that is the court system and police and things like that. And
Mhm.
I sort of found the answer for myself in a way, or found the argument that convinced myself at the same time as I was elected for office in Sweden. So it's easy to remember that I sort of went both ways at the same time. But other than
Mhm.
that, I mean, I'm I've written a few books on sound economics primarily, uh, and I'm working on another couple of books.
Yeah, and speaking of books, the recent one that you wrote, the primer, which is absolutely fantastic. Like when I first read it, and I was trying to get Andrew to finally get into it and read. I think he finally just listened to it last night while it was at work.
Yeah.
But
I've had a
which
copy
is
for a while. I've just been
yeah,
busy, so
he's just been busy to read it. But I honestly like I don't know if you were meant to do this, but like I kind of made it in my opinion, it kind of felt like a kind of a layman's terminology to like human action, like to dumb it down for all of us plebes, because you know how human action is just outrageously long, and then Mises was a cosmopolitan of his day, so like it's hard to follow if you don't understand the terminology and the vocabulary in that book. So, and that's what I loved about it was a layman's term for like a little old me who could understand it.
yeah, no, that was actually the purpose of it. I mean, the way this project came about was that I mentioned to Jeff Deist when he was president of the Mises Institute that there seemed to be like a gap in the market for very short, uh, easy to understand intros to sound economics. I mean, everybody
Hmm.
uh, was probably referring to Hazlitt's economics in one lesson back then, and it is one lesson to begin with. So it's not actually covering the whole economy.
Hmm.
You just get opportunity cost and the seen and the unseen over and over and over again applied on different things, which is
Hmm.
awesome. But how do you take the step from realizing that, oh, there's unseen to, oh yeah, business cycles, they work this way, or monetary theory, or what have you. All of those things are sort of, you have to take that leap yourself. So in my discussions with Jeff, we we agreed that we should have something that is sort of a go-to resource for anyone, that you can basically sit at the dinner table with people and hand it out to your your family members and your grandma And
Mm-hmm.
someone's grammar was sort of the market for that when I wrote the book too, that it should be half the length of Hazlitt's classic. It should cover the whole economy, not just one lesson, and it should be
Mm-hmm.
completely without jargon and just introduce what is economics, what does it say, how do you do it, how do you think about the economy.
Definitely
That's what I.
delivered in
Oh,
a
go
way
ahead.
it's a strong impression, but like Zach said, it's easier to stomach for a lot of people. So I
Mm-hmm.
think you did a very good job of it.
Well, thank you. And I mean, it is short enough that most people should be able to read it in a couple of hours, 3 hours, something like that. I mean, even if you're not like a speed reader. And I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's available to download for free in different formats, and you can listen to it as well if that is what you prefer. And I mean, right now I think it's available in 6 languages, and more are coming.
That's fascinating, actually. And, I mean, Andrew, the Japanese guru over here, is it in Japanese, or will it ever be in Japanese?
Oh, well, I'm sure potentially, and if it isn't now, it will be in the future. So
Japanese is underway. It's not been published yet, and I'm not sure if how far along the translation is yet, but
hmm,
it is one of the projects. I think right now there are, I mean, with the 6 translations already, I think there are about another dozen that are
hmm,
underway, but these are not, most of them are not professional translations, so they're not like a real quote unquote publisher
yeah,
who hires a translator and then publishes the book, but instead it's people who really like the book and want to translate it themselves to make it available to their own
Mm-hmm.
countrymen in their own language. So it in some cases it takes a little longer time. In some cases it's really fast and really professional, even though it's sort of amateurish in how it's done. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean some of the I was at the release for the Dutch version um, now a couple of months ago, a month ago. And it's a beautiful product. They did a really, really good job. I can't speak to the actual translation into Dutch, of course, but
yeah.
I understand that
Mm-hmm.
it is really, really, really nicely done, and it's a good read in Dutch. And the book itself looks beautiful.
And it is. It's a very very beautiful book, and the concept of just the basic concept of what economy should always be about is like the voluntary aspect. I mean, the entrepreneur aspect. I mean, we can go further more. I mean, my question is like we're we're in this fight in today's culture war scenario between socialism and capitalism, but I come from the belief, and I don't know if Andrew is completely on my side on this one, but I come from the belief that capitalism in itself is just another form of socialist or statist control and like monopolization of private ownership of money, when in reality we just it'd be better to have a competition. I mean, whatever wins the day is what you use and your means of exchange. So what are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree. I have sort of a problem with the word capitalism itself, and I've written a few
Mm-hmm.
columns on that too. That
Mm-hmm.
means so many different things to different people, and they when they discuss it, they tend to not define it, and they will just basically hurl insults at each other and say, "You're a capitalist, no, you're a capitalist," or "You're not a capitalist, and you're not a capitalist," and
Yeah.
then you never
Mm-hmm.
really get past
Mm-hmm.
that. And I mean, the problem here is that from my perspective and from the libertarian perspective, it was really a term from the beginning that was not intended to describe a free market. So
Mm-hmm.
it was intended to describe sort of the exploitation of capital owners
Mm-hmm.
in what is, of course, a state-controlled economy and
Mm-hmm.
with free exchange to the extent that the state allows it. So, I mean, when people refer to the US today as a capitalist society, according to this definition, yeah, it is one. To a
Mm-hmm.
libertarian, they would probably prefer to call it a state capitalist society. So the difference
Mm-hmm.
between, say, the US and China is just varying degrees of fascism in a sense. But
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're a proponent of free markets, then all you need is really just property rights. and then let people trade in whatever way and fashion they feel like, and let market prices allocate resources, and let entrepreneurs figure out how to best serve consumers. And that's really where economic theory should start, simply because there is a way that economies work that is sort of, I'm not sure if you could put it that way, that it's programmed into us, but as human beings, we act in certain ways. And based off of that, we will interact in certain ways as well. So we can say that economies work in very specific ways. And that means that we can't start with the state, because the state is oppression, and it's well, exploitation as well, but it's using coercion to force certain outcomes, which of course never actually works very well. But it's always fighting against the economic understanding and the economic laws of human behavior. And since you have this conflict between what Oppenheimer called the political and the economic means, so force and coercion versus voluntary interaction, and those two systems work different ways, and the coercion way, the state way, it works in conflict with what voluntarily would have been the case. You can't really start to figure out what is going on without starting with what would be the case in an economy without the state, and then you add the state to it. So it's sort of a thought experiment. How do you do that? And I think a lot of people especially on the left, but it's among statists in general, they tend to start with, what does it look like right now? And they sort of implicitly or sometimes explicitly assume that the state is necessary. Sometimes you hear people saying that markets must be designed by the state to exist, which is complete rubbish. I mean, if you just let people be in any situation, they will start to trade and cooperate in different ways, and that's market interaction, right? So it can be disproven every day in everybody's lives. But you can't really separate what is economic and what is state and or political unless you start at the right end. And most people, unfortunately, they start at the wrong end.
I think another issue is like our education system anymore around the world has kind of like deviated people away from that true concept of like that voluntary means. And I think if more people went into, I hear it from like people that I know or family that specifically family, where like they've done their little niche and in their little side hustles or even businesses on their own. Like I said, like I did a plug at the beginning of the show for my cousin for woodworking and all that. Like he kind of knows how hard it is in business, but I think like the concept of running your own business is the real teacher of economics and in reality. I mean, you can get so much from a book, you can get so much from a professor, but then at the end of the day, you have to go out and do it and go head on and actually see how the real world works, really. And the real world can get pretty ugly. So,
yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I mean, in my own experience, entrepreneurs, and especially those who have sort of tried several times, whether they succeeded or not doesn't really matter, but they just have the experience of trying several times and sort of have a feel for what works and what doesn't work, and especially what errors and what mistakes to avoid. They tend to have sort of a tacit understanding of how the economy works and how markets work. And very often the reaction from them when talking to them is that, oh, yeah, that's what I mean. I just didn't have the words for it, right? So sound economics really just puts words to what they have experienced and what they understand. And I think the problem, you mentioned public education, and I think one of the big problems today is that not only public education, but a lot of people go through life without ever being exposed to the market. So it is just what, like you said, that if you start a business, well, back in the day, everybody was a freaking business, right? So go back a couple of 100 years, if you were a farmer or whatever it was, you had to sell your surplus in the market to others. You have to figure out prices and so forth. And you had to buy tools from the blacksmith or whoever. And then you had to negotiate prices there too. And how much is it worth to you and all this stuff, right? Whereas
Mm-hmm.
today, no, we just show up and we spend some time warming up a cubicle, and then we have a bunch of money in a bank account that we never see actual money. We just use cards and whatever, and then we go out and buy stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
if we don't have enough, the state will step in and give us a handout so as we can cover the costs, right? So that means we're not really exposed to the so-called market forces, which means, of course, we're not going to understand them either. And we're going to be falling into this sort of central planning trap, thinking that if we could just have this one strong man to just make things right, right? Just push
Mm-hmm.
things into order, right? So in a sense, both public education and the whole economy, the way it's been structured with huge corporations, with government agencies and things like that, and so little entrepreneurship, really. That's what I'm saying. Uh, People are protected from the market forces. They don't learn how markets actually work, and therefore they tend to believe in central planning, and that's
Mm-hmm.
disastrous, of course, because that's just hands power to politicians and political decision makers on a silver platter.
Yeah. And do you think that's like strongman is a key word? Like, do you think that's the idea of surrounding the unacknowledgement? I think I just made up a word there. The unacknowledgement of the of the market from the layman, the 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 normal people out there is that I mean, and with coming into the reality of like politics and voting, is that the reason why you get your Trumps or your Modis in India, your Xi Jinpings, your Putins? I mean, people are looking for this leader that'll take forth and provide for them for what they're missing in life. They're kind of like outsourcing their own indifference to not knowing what the market is all about and what their potential is.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, to a great extent. I mean, in a sense, it seems like a shortcut
Mm-hmm.
to a more sane and more reliable world. And it seems like, I mean, I think we're hardwired this way, right? That
Mm-hmm.
if we just let things be and decentralize, we have no control. We don't really know what's going to happen. We have no idea
Mm-hmm.
what the outcome might be. And anything can happen. And we are really risk averse and we really don't like the potential for danger. So, and we know
Mm-hmm.
that there are crazy people out there and tend to assume that a lot of people are crazy, and that's not simply not true. So having someone to just correct things and
Mm-hmm.
get rid of the problems in a sense seems like a shortcut and a simple way of solving the problem. But of course, it's sort of the Hobbesian mistake, right? Assuming that,
Mm-hmm.
well, everybody's at each other's throats and it's a war of all against all, and therefore we need to make this guy the dictator so he can have his own war against all. I mean, that's not the
Mm-hmm.
solution to the problem at all. It just means
Mm-hmm.
that everybody's enslaved, but somehow people fall into this trap. And whether this is through our evolution or wherever it comes from, it's highly problematic because it means that any argument for freedom in general and markets specifically uh, is always an uphill battle because people don't intuitively understand what that means. So you have to prove it to them. And I mean, you will always get, and you probably have this experience too, that when you suggest that this should be deregulated or there should be free markets in
Mm-hmm.
general, people always come up with this example of someone who is going to take advantage of others or someone who can easily be taken advantage of. And who's going to protect it? Who's going to guarantee this?
Mm-hmm.
Right. But the issue is, of course, that there is no world where there is any guarantee. So
Yeah.
either you have a structure of power and coercion that is going to destroy and it's going to hold us back in terms of creating wealth and prosperity, or we just do it ourselves. But in neither case, there is a guarantee.
Yeah, it's all about trade-offs to the outcome. And I mean, like the example of mutually assured destruction with nuclear weapons. Like, I have nuclear weapons, you have nuclear weapons. How about we just not kill each other? Because we'll just wipe out humanity. So there's always a trade-off here and there. No, most people, but to the average person, they don't see it. And they see it as a fear, and so we got to cling on to this in order to make sure that that doesn't happen. I mean, and in reality, it's just about I'm gonna do my thing. Leave me alone. I'll leave you alone. But if we have to conduct business, well, let's create that relationship. Let's conduct business. Mm,
Yeah, and that is what is so fascinating too. I think that first of all, in our neighborhoods and in our little towns or what in our clubs or churches or whatever it might be that
mhm,
you're hanging out and spending your time, no one is really saying that, well, hold on, I can't really talk to my neighbors over here. We need someone to make sure that we don't kill each other. I mean, we need someone to step in and just make sure that we don't commit crimes against each other. And yeah, you
mhm,
can claim that the state is ever present and whatever, but that no, the state doesn't even figure out who is the criminal in most cases. So it's not really
mhm,
that present. And in most of our daily lives, we are basically living anarchy. So it's not really a problem, but people have a hard time taking the practice and taking it to the higher level and say, well, maybe if all neighborhoods could work this way, and all neighborhoods could work this way with respect to each other too, isn't that
mhm,
wouldn't that be possible? But that's sort of logical. I don't think people have they don't really have an incentive to think in this way, right? To think about the system and society in a systematic, structured manner, because they live their own lives. I mean, you can't really blame
mhm,
them either.
Yeah.
What you can blame them for, however, is sort of a pet peeve of mine that people nowadays consider whoever says, do whatever the heck you want, just leave me alone. And
mhm,
that guy is the threat. For some reason, people nowadays think that that guy who just wants to be left alone, doesn't want to harm anyone, doesn't want to even influence anyone, that guy is a threat to our way of life. And
mhm,
in a sense, they're right, because someone just minding their own business is indeed a threat to any power-based hierarchy, because it shows that, wait a minute, that guy is surviving, that guy is even thriving on his own and with his own friends and with his interactions, and there is no power center to control him. So the example itself is a huge problem for power. I'm not sure they're thinking of it in that way. They just want to make sure that that guy is following the same rules as I am, or whatever it might be.
yeah. I mean, what are rules anyways, besides the fact that people are going to agree on one thing and disagree on the other, but I mean, as long as we're peaceable, there's your rule. Like, just stay out of business. If you don't, I mean, go with the Hoppian idea, the Hoppian approach of like freedom of association. If you want to set up your own society here, Andrew, you love this. You want to have your own HOA. I mean, in a sense, your own little Liechtenstein. I mean,
Yeah.
then why not? Why not have like 5,000 different Liechtensteins and or any other microstate that you can think of, or Monaco or whatever, instead of like one big country. And yeah, and we just have chaos.
Yeah, we tend to think of centralized solutions as simple and um, cheaper solutions, right? I mean, it's
Hmm.
the common the sort of standard argument in politics is that, well, we can't solve these issues on a state level because it's a national issue and it has national
Hmm.
consequences. So the feds need to step in and take this. And of course, the feds would be probably the first ones to argue that, well, the federal government should do this because the states can't handle it. And
Yeah.
you see the
Hmm.
same thing in the European Union that, oh, there are so many issues that the nation states can't handle, or they, God forbid, they want different solutions. What if we
Hmm.
could just have one solution, and assuming it works perfectly, then that would be a great solution. So the EU will
Hmm.
take power step by step from all the nation states, of course, in Europe, just like the federal government here in the US will and has taken power from the states, just like the states take power from local communities and so forth. Because we
Hmm.
sort of want to believe in that dream that just because there's one rule and one ruler, it's so
Hmm.
much more effective. And I mean, you even see, which is sort of funny, but you even see those advocating democracy as the best system or the least bad system or whatever they want to call it. say that, well, yeah, dictatorships are much more effective. So it's to solve a real problem, this existential problem like the pandemic. I mean, they use that argument then. It's good to have someone like President Xi in China to just with one hand just direct the whole country and shut down that province to stop the virus or whatever. But in democracy, it takes more time and it's costly way of doing it, but it's the right way. But it's in some situations, it's just not all that adequate and appropriate. But it's a cost that we would have to usually bear because it's the better system in terms of some kind of freedom. But it's not actually true. If you know any economics, that just direction from above would be more effective and provide a better outcome because those two are sort of put side by side. It might be more effective in terms of making decisions because it's just the one guy making decisions. But the outcome is going to be worse.
Yeah.
It's always going to be worse because you're going to have, first of all, one outcome and a one size fits all. And it's really one size for all fits the ruler. That's what we're talking about, right? It's that guy's opinion. And then it's being shoved down everybody's throats, whether they like it or not, and whether there are better solutions or not, doesn't really matter. But I mean, the good solutions are the ones that are adopted and that sort of bubble up from below, that sort of emerge spontaneously as standards for how people treat each other. I mean, an example that I use when I teach institutions, as they're called in the scientific literature, is just walking across the path on campus. You would think that, well, there are no rules. There are very few signs saying how you should walk, how fast, on what side, and things like that. So you would expect people just bump into each other all the time. And then, of course, there would be fights and all this stuff because, oh, you bumped into me again. You did that last week. And then you would have sort of road rage or path rage on campus. But you don't, because people tend to walk in this country on the right side. And why do they do that? Is that because there's a federal law saying that on pathways and sidewalks, you have to walk on the right side when you meet someone? No, there's no such law. There's also no one who told you that stay on the right side or else. That also didn't happen. But people chose to, and because a lot of people walked on the right side, a lot of other people adjusted their behavior and they walk on the right side. And now there's sort of a standard, and no one is harmed unless you have someone who's really, really interested and puts a lot of prestige into walking on the left side. But that guy is going to have a lot of problems getting to where he wants to go anyway. Right. So it sort of it orders itself if you just let people be. And people tend to forget about this.
Yeah, that's interesting. Or like with driving, like if you don't see a posted speed limit, I mean, I've noticed like if the speed limit sign down the road somewhere and nobody really knows what the speed limit is, most people actually drive kind of correctly. I mean, that's very laughable for the United States here because we just drive like reckless maniacs anyways. But
Yeah.
when then all of a sudden you see a 30 or 40 mile per hour speed limit and then it goes down, then you see the next one that says 25, and then I mean people can't really adjust. They're just going to go with their speed. And then you see more people speeding and then more accidents because somebody else is going to have to come out from an intersecting road. And I mean, when you apply too many regulations, it's usually when you get the chaos because everybody's trying to adjust to the rules. And then you have those that don't really want to apply the rules to themselves. And you just have a mesh of just issues. And so, my next question is, speaking of regulations and the lack of creativity and all for the precautionary tale of safety, um, zoning laws for property, like property rights should belong to the person that owns property, and what they want to do on their property should be that. But why is it that zoning laws have propped up over probably the last century, realistically?
Well, I mean, realistically, it's zoning laws are simply because politicians want to correct things and
Mm,
take get get the. I mean, they want people to thank them for creating order and whatever else. But I think there
mm-hmm,
were basically something like this is not really my expertise, but I think there were in common law sort of standards for placing industry in certain areas and living quarters in other areas and things like that, because people don't want a factory to run
mm-hmm.
where you sleep because it's going to keep you up at night and things like that. Of
Yeah.
course, this is and if you move into an area, it might be the case that you mentioned the HOA before. You might be the case
Mm-hmm,
that the HOA or maybe the neighborhood organization or whatever, they sort of have a rule that and that if you buy a property in this area, you agree to not make noise after 10 p.m. and whatever else, right? And then
mm-hmm,
that's part of the deal with owning that property. If you don't like it, don't buy that property or try to negotiate that rule or whatever.
mm-hmm,
But you by buying it, you're sort of accepting the terms,
mm-hmm,
and it does make sense. I mean, especially in say an apartment complex that at a certain hour you can't play really really loud music to bother everyone 24/7. Um, so that makes sense, and those rules, I mean, they're accepted when people move in. That there are laws, uh, zoning. Um, I mean, that's highly problematic because those laws, I mean, it take more laws to change the zoning. And
mm-hmm,
so it makes it very permanent, whereas in the sort of spontaneous orders, they are more fluid. So if people start to behave differently, say that you have an area in a city where there are living quarters and another area where there are shops, but there's more
mm-hmm,
demand for shops than there are for actual houses in the city, well, then you would see the shop area expand a little bit. And it wouldn't
mm-hmm,
expand by simply having suddenly more shops where people already live, but it will sort of expand maybe block by block or whatever, because there's demand for it. So the limits and the boundaries between the two would sort of be fluid, at least over
mm-hmm,
time, that they would change. But if you have zoning laws, well, then you need to petition government, and government needs to involve all those bureaucrats, and they have to vote, and then you have
mm-hmm.
all these special interests get involved with should it be changed this way or that way. And I mean, you can imagine if people are moving out from that zone where people are supposed to live, uh, and there's more demand for shops, are the shops going to lobby for, yeah, more competition? Yeah, of course not. They they
Mm-hmm.
they might want to lobby for shifting the boundary a little bit so they get closer to where people live, but not to include more shops. They don't want that, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
uh, in a free society, there wouldn't be zoning laws, of course, but there might still be zones and there might be
Mm-hmm.
agreements. So those are different things. I mean, I'm not sure exactly of the uh sort of history and origins of zoning laws, because in Europe, for instance, there isn't a whole lot of that. So, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, in Stockholm, Sweden, where I'm from, there are no zones saying that this area is for shops, this area is for apartments where people can reside and things like that. That doesn't exist. I'm not sure if that is. I mean, it never really uh, emerged historically. There were areas where you had more shops, but that didn't exclude
Mm-hmm.
other things, right? Just like you have areas like the red light district in Amsterdam where they sell certain types of products and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But that's more of coordination among the sellers and the buyers, that it's a lesser cost simply, so they do that. But nothing says that this is where it stops and this is where it starts, and that's going to be the case until we create a new rule.
Yeah, I mean, it all comes out into like cooperation. Like if people want to get together and take the responsibility of figuring out different areas, that's one thing. But I mean, it's nice when bureaucrats get involved. I mean, I've seen this like in northern Kentucky where I live. They just Amazon just built this huge their huge warehouse for airport warehouse for their Amazon Air, and they've torn out mountains and along the road where they built it in order to build roads and all that. And then all of a sudden, like out of nowhere, they built another warehouse for other use. So another company moved into there, and then next to that warehouse, across from the airport and Amazon, is an apartment complex. Is like, well, that doesn't make any sense with, so you basically you shuffled zoning law, you shuffled the zoning in order to put an apartment complex, I guess. I would assume the hope was maybe they'll go work over there, but I mean, it's an apartment by an airport, by warehousing. It's like, what is the point of the zoning laws if that's going to be the case? If that was the whole premise of it to begin with, was to separate business from industrial from residential. So it's mind-boggling the way that zoning laws can get manipulated when it gets and thrusted into the bureaucracy.
But that's the nature of the game, right? So
Hmm.
whenever you have the decision-making power centralized, well, that
Hmm.
means that that power can benefit quite a lot from getting extra uh, payments on the side from different interests. And of course, for
Hmm.
whoever is interested in this issue, they benefit a lot by being able to influence this power as well. So I mean,
Hmm.
if you just have one guy deciding whatever, say you have one guy in the city who has to decide what flavor ice cream are we gonna eat the next year.
Hmm.
Well, suddenly, first of all, you're just gonna have one flavor ice cream, so a lot of people are gonna be pissed off. But then what's gonna happen with this guy? Well, a lot of people are gonna try to influence that guy because they want this guy who wants strawberry. He knows that this guy is gonna vote vanilla, and then you have the chocolate guy, and he's gonna they all want to try to make this guy accept that maybe there should be like just a vanilla with a little strawberry flavor in it or whatever. You can just shift the decision a little bit in your direction because that's a gain for you, right? Well, that means that that guy is not going to do anything unless you can make him do it, especially if you're competing with a chocolate flavor guy. So well, maybe if you can help him out in some way, so you give him part of your profits, or you give him a stipend for really looking into the issue of which ice cream flavor is the best one, or whatever it might be, right? But then you have to outbid the other ones too, in order
Hmm.
to actually get the influence. And this guy might actually accept it from all of them and say, "Oh, I will treat them fairly, and I will look at all the arguments." So this guy's going to get rich from this arbitrary power, and people are still going to get their one flavor ice cream instead of being able to choose from different ones. So just by
Hmm.
instituting this power, you create all these really weird and harmful incentives where a lot of payments and a lot of effort is put into changing the decision instead of letting people choose for themselves. So it's so enormously not only inefficient but wasteful, this type of system.
Hmm. Yeah, it's waste. It's well, I mean, centralized. It's just all waste, and then we're at a time frame in our society today where like the big narrative and political issue, economical issue is climate change and and industry waste and pollution and all this. But it just seems like if you in a freer society, you would see a little bit more of that cleanup. You wouldn't see a whole lot of waste because resources are scarce, land is scarce. In order to build upon, in order to utilize those resources, to produce those resources, create those products. So, like, I mean, there people would be more mindful in a more competitive atmosphere, whereas you have all these oligarchs or monopolies that are running around paying off for different interests here and there. They're just going to do whatever they want because they can just kick back to the bureaucrat or to the king and say, hey, I'm just going to smog up this whole entire town with God knows what I'm putting into the air. Because why not? Or I'm going to pollute your river. I'm just going to dump where I please. So, I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly. And imagine just garbage collection, and what do you do with your garbage in a free society where there's no government to just allow whatever crap and everything's privately owned? Well, you will
hmm
have to pay someone to take care of it, and that someone is going to charge you more than it costs to take care of it,
hmm
right? Because they're not going to just be generous and give you as a charitable donation to take your trash. That's not going to happen. So
hmm
you will have to pay for it, which means that you would probably to a greater extent minimize your actual trash. And
hmm
you might use some of the trash because you can use it for whatever you feel like, right? So you would probably
hmm
separate it. You will recycle a little more, and you will, as a consumer, put a lot of pressure on the producers that don't get me this stuff with all this packaging. I'm gonna have to do something with the packaging, you idiots, right? Because
hmm
I'm paying per pound of plastic, per pound of paper, per pound of whatever, and it's costing me an arm and a leg. And there you go selling your stuff, and it's in like 3 layers of packaging. Stop this
hmm
nonsense. I want to have it in a glass bottle and I'll just bring the glass bottle. That's so much easier and cheaper for me, right? So, I
hmm
mean, a lot of the a lot of the problems we have with waste and garbage is really created because we just allow for, well, landfills where no one is really covering the cost or bearing the cost at all of what's going to happen with those things. Um, and instead, we're basically subsidizing trash, and whatever you subsidize, you get more of. So of course, you get a lot of packaging and plastics and
hmm
whatever the heck you want, and less recycling than otherwise would be the case. It's pretty obvious. The solution is not to impose new rules on producers politically, because then you're going to have the same problem again with well, this one decision maker, and then you have different packaging producers lobbying for this or that, and lobbying against their competitors, of course, as well. I mean, just private property would solve so many problems.
hmm And I mean, the issue with the trash thing is, I think it's funny because you get the, like, gigantic mountains. Like, I'll go up to Columbus and I pass through, going just from the south of it, and there's this big old mountain. Just it's gotten humongous over the years, just because of all the trash. It's like, wow, we're making our own mountains. So,
Yeah, and there are mountains of plastic and other crap that it's going to be there for
hmm
hundreds or thousands of years.
hmm
Unless, of course, in the future at some point, which might actually be the case, someone discovers that, hey, plastic can be actually be used for this or whatever it might be,
hmm
and it could be a resource. Then you're going to have people maybe mining the landfills for plastic just because it's suddenly a resource. I mean, we're really ingenious when we have scarcity uh, to get around and try to lessen the burden of that scarcity. We figure out all kinds of solutions, which is exactly the problem with government because it gives us a free for all, which means it's not scarce anymore, and then we just go ahead and do whatever the heck we want.
Yeah. I'd like to apologize if that came through and that was my cats fighting. So,
Oh,
so hopefully that didn't come through, but they were loud, screeching.
I didn't know
Uh,
this was the kind of podcast with cat fights and
sometimes,
yeah.
sometimes
Only
we
on
like,
weekends, right?
oh, only on the weekends. So Andrew, you got anything?
Well,
You've been sitting quietly.
I was just sitting here listening to the conversation, and I have a few points that I'd like to bring up. Um, in a free society, we have this concentrated impression of what freedom is, but once you actually try to scale, you get involved with politics, and with a concentrated money supply run by one central actor, the only way to scale adequately is to degrade people's rights, and that's through saying things are illegal, putting one on the back burner and saying, "Oh, well, your grandparents could have done this, but you can't do this now because it's unpopular," or you put people in jail or send them to war. And the as Ayn Rand said, the memory gets degraded. You can't maintain that momentum. So I don't know. I just that's something I was thinking.
Yeah, I mean, central banking and the fractional reserve banking, or as it is now, no reserve banking, has caused so much problems. I mean, in a sense, just going back to history, it's pretty clear where this idea came from and why. Because kings wanted to wage wars and they couldn't pay for it, and
Mhm.
that was it. And how to finance a war if you don't have the money? Well, you borrow money from the bankers. And then even better, you create your own central bank and force all bankers to work within that system. And then you borrow from
Mhm.
that, and then why not create a little more money instead? And then you can have even more glorious wars to increase your prestige, and people's lives are lost, but that doesn't really matter to you because it doesn't really affect your wealth. But the prestige of getting a little more territory, I mean, that's what matters. And in a sense, that's what the government is doing today too, even though it's democratic. I mean, it's not waging as much war, perhaps, depending on how you count it, I suppose, but offensive wars for territory. But instead, it's wars on ideologies and on religion, and wars for resources, and wars on terrorism, and wars on poverty, and wars on pretty much anything. And all of this nonsense, well, I mean, none of it could really uh, be afforded by the government if they were actually taxing people for it. So that they
Mhm.
need the power of the purse in the sense that they fill the purse with nonsense and they use that to pay with. I mean, it's yeah, getting rid of the Fed and getting rid of fiat currency is definitely a big step towards a sounder and freer world. I'm not sure how that's going to happen though, other than just the implosion. And for some reason, they seem very intent on creating an implosion of the whole banking system through just a massive uh, issue of currency. So maybe we'll see that soon. It's gonna be quite nasty for a while before it all gets settled. But that's where we're heading.
And I think that's the plan. I think the plan is the inevitable implosion because I think, I mean, and this is from like reading Preacher from Jekyll Island, but the Federal Reserve System in this country is effectively just trying to make it to where eventually the International Monetary Fund will take over everything, like on the financial and economic sector, and then I guess from there you have your for all of you conspiracy theorists out there, your one world government. I mean, I think that's the whole concept. I mean, it's just consolidating into that status utopia of hopeful peace, I guess. I
I
don't
mean,
know how you
that's
get peace.
that's the obvious solution that they're going to offer, right? That when you have
Hmm.
these booms and busts, and then you have these exchange rates that fluctuate a lot, and that imposes costs
Hmm.
on businesses, and it's hard to travel and all this stuff. I mean, that's one of the arguments for the euro. That's, oh, you have to exchange money when you travel. Oh no.
Hmm.
Like that was a huge issue when you're on a 4-day vacation somewhere. But for businesses, it is a problem, but it's a problem caused by fiat
Hmm.
currencies, not a problem of having free money. But the solution is, of course, what if there was one system instead? So we didn't have to bother with all these different systems. And so centralization would be the obvious sort of statist solution to this. And then why don't we have one central bank for the globe and with one
Hmm.
government? Because if we have one central bank and different governments, you're going to have the same problem as they do in the EU now with governments spending at different rates, and therefore some countries subsidizing other countries. And basically,
Hmm.
uh, the more financially uh, savvy and they will basically sponsor those who don't care at all, like Germany before basically sending money to Greece because Greece were mishandling their economy like crazy. So you're
Hmm.
supporting the bad stuff, which usually happens in government structures. So of course, a global currency and a global currency system is going to lead to a calls for a global government, and people are going
Hmm.
to think that that seems pretty reasonable and it's an intuitive solution. And it's going to be even harder for anyone to argue that, well, maybe we shouldn't have a government controlled currency at all. Maybe we should just trade with each other with whatever we feel like. And that's going to be an even harder argument if there is a global currency. And of course, it's going to be a way for them to just shield us from seeing the actual implications and consequences of their mismanaging the economy. Because we're not going to see it if everybody uses the same currency and they just keep printing money, and you have some, I don't know, 15, 20 billion people using that type of money with businesses and everything, then it's going to be really hard to see the structural problems that are now rather apparent between countries and between countries with different monetary policies, that you're causing problems at different rates and with different magnitudes and things like that. But I mean, the possible solution to that problem is not, I think, to argue for gold, even though I would like that to happen. But I think that's a really hard argument to make. But instead, people will probably put a lot of their savings and probably even their sort of liquid funds into alternative things like Bitcoin or whatever. And gold maybe for longer term savings, but Bitcoin, and then start trading with people with something that is not constantly falling in value.
Speaking of Bitcoin, what are your thoughts on the concept of Bitcoin? And I mean, does it seem like, because to me it seems Bitcoin in itself has been kind of hijacked, and I mean, with the whole store of value concept, I mean, being more of an investment, a speculative investment. But what are your thoughts on like cryptocurrency? And I mean, and what is your view on what could be the one that pops up and wins the day, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, if I knew, I would have invested a lot in that cryptocurrency. But I mean, I
Hmm.
don't know, and I don't think we can really say either. Right now, it looks like Bitcoin has the greatest chance, but you never know. It could be
Hmm.
something else. I mean,
Hmm.
very often for these solutions, you tend to think of the biggest or the first one as the one that is going to sweep the world and change everything.
Hmm.
But it might just be that maybe it's not uh, the benefits of Bitcoin that people like the most. Maybe it's another type of
Hmm.
cryptocurrency that they prefer because of some other advantages.
Hmm.
So I mean, different cryptocurrencies are structured in different ways. So some of them are entirely private, and some
Hmm.
of them are entirely open, and some of them are focusing on being really fast with transactions, even though there are errors in it. But that doesn't really matter because it's so fast, and
Hmm.
stuff like that. And who knows what consumers actually prefer? And I mean, that's the beauty of entrepreneurship in a sense, right? That you're offering these different and differentiated products, and then the consumers will sort them out and figure out which ones are worth it and which ones are not. And you can't really tell beforehand which is going to be the one that people like most, because it depends on their behavior and what they understand about it and everything like that. So I think it's impossible to say which one people might turn to, but I think you're right that Bitcoin has become sort of an asset, and
Hmm.
it's a great asset to hold in the sense that it doesn't take any space.
Hmm.
So it's not like art or something like that that you need to put in an actual physical space somewhere. You need to protect it. Whereas Bitcoin, well, it just can basically float in the cloud. I mean, I know that's not really the case, but you don't actually need a storage unit with guards to protect your
Hmm.
Bitcoins. So in that sense, it's it's definitely a benefit for those who just want to use it as an asset to just store value for a while. And
Hmm.
if it increases in value, then that's good. But I mean, it's if anything, if we know anything about Bitcoin as a money, then it is not. I mean,
Hmm.
it's not the medium of exchange. It's used as a medium of exchange, but a lot of things are, right? So you have plenty of different societies and circles and groups of people, associations where they use other things than dollars, for instance, for as currency. Well, so they have a different medium of exchange, but you can't go to any store with Bitcoin, not yet. So it's not a money yet, which means it is an asset by by definition, right? Will it take over? I think I've claimed a few times, and people have hated me for it, but I've claimed that the Bitcoin's problem is not really the technology, because the technology is pretty good. Bitcoin's problem is the entrepreneurship. And by what I mean by that is the innovation, not the invention, the technology, but the innovation to make it actually of value to people to use in their everyday lives. So it's a very innovative still. I'm not saying it's not, but it's not sufficiently innovative yet to have it adopted as a money by people in general. And part of it, of course, is legal tender laws and things like that. But I mean, you also have laws. I think is it Missouri now that is halfway through accepting a law saying that you should be able to pay taxes and whatever else using gold. So I mean, there are all these, there are all these initiatives on the state level, and of course they can't say that, oh, we're going to use euros instead, because per the Constitution, it's the federal government that produces the money, right? But what they can do, at least it seems like like they're doing in Missouri, is because the Constitution mentions gold and silver, they can accept gold and silver as well as whatever fiat currency the federal government is issuing. And I mean, is that going to have an impact? I don't know how many people are going to go to the Missouri Department of Revenue with a gold coin to pay off their taxes, but it does mean that you could have businesses pay their employees in using gold and then ship whatever gold to the Department of Revenue in preliminary taxes and withholding taxes. I mean, it opens up anyway for other things than dollars to be money. And should something happen to the dollar so that we get massive inflation, you're going to see more people move towards what is not what does not suffer inflation, like gold or Bitcoin or whatever right? So depending on what kind of nastiness they're creating on the federal level, we could actually see people flee into using real money in a sense.
And speaking of the gold and silver exchange laws, I think Kentucky just passed something too. So I think it's Missouri and Kentucky now. So I think when I read the Kentucky one, I think it actually said that it was the 45th state to go to where you can use gold. So I guess 45 states are doing it. So it's interesting.
I mean, the first step there was this movement a few years back where they stopped requiring sales tax on transactions in gold and in the coins, right? Because if there's a sales tax on it, I mean, if there's a sales tax on using dollars, then why would you use dollars, right? So just abolishing sales tax, they're saying that it does not apply to gold and silver coins or any precious metals that opens it up for actually using it and trading with it. And the more people trade with it, the closer it's going to get to being a money. So, I mean, this is the next step. And if it is really 45 states, like you said, then I mean, that is awesome. Because the way I look at the economy right now is that, well, it's fairly fake. I mean, structurally, it's very unsound because of all this money creation since over 100 years at least. So it's not really aligned with where consumers want production to be at all. And then the government is spending like crazy, new dollars. So you had the Great Depression from 29, and what saved us then was definitely not Roosevelt and the New Deal that just prolonged everything. but we
Mm-hmm.
were still on sort of a gold standard. So there was some basis for the value of the money, so it couldn't just go through the floor. Today, that is
Mm-hmm.
not the case. But since we have these rules now being adopted in different states that you can use gold if you want to, uh, that might actually become a floor. So people abandon the dollar when it goes too far in
Mm-hmm.
inflation, much like in the Weimar Republic, where people just stopped caring about the currency because it's not worth anything. And I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if you wait an hour, it's worth half of what it was worth before. You
Mm-hmm.
can't use currency like that, right? And
No.
then people would just go for whatever resources and assets are available, and then people will turn to something else for trade, whether it's cigarettes or canned soup or gold
Mm-hmm. Or ammo. I
or
mean,
ammo. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, especially, and that's my fear is if we, especially in this country, is like if we get to that level of hyperinflation, it probably is going to have to be ammo. And yeah, I mean, just because people are going to be so desperate because we've been so comfortable for so long because of the money creation and the excess fiat that people are just a lot of people don't really realize there's other alternatives out there, even though they're right in front of their face, that they'll just get violent and start stealing and thieving and potentially killing.
Right. I mean, you already have the problem that I read about in California and other places along
Mm-hmm.
the West Coast where with squatters who are just
Mm-hmm.
moving into people's homes. Of course, when people are not living there, but I mean, the next step is to move into people's large homes where when someone is living there and just force your way
Mm-hmm.
in. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and if it gets desperate, then of course people are going to do that. And then I think you're right that having an ammo would be important. And if it is
Mm-hmm.
important to have, then it's something people are going to trade for.
Mm-hmm.
And then it might actually turn into a medium of trading for other things as well.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'd prefer the medium of exchange be like some eggs or something, but I mean, if it's got to be ammo, it's got to be ammo. So, or cigarettes. I mean, that's the prison system is very big on cigarettes, and if it works there, it'll definitely work here. So, may not have worked out for Eric Garner, but New York's fascist, so and racist. Yeah. Mm-mm. So, Andrew, you're thinking over there. I know you got more to say. I know you got more to ask and more
Yeah.
points to bring up.
Well, I just think, we was just talking about California and people moving into unoccupied houses, and like he said, eventually they're going to start moving into occupied houses, and neutrality is a finite resource. And when you when the social pressure with not creating conflict leads leads down this path eventually. Sorry, eventually eventually conflict is inevitable. So
Yeah, and desperation tends to lead to conflict very easily, right? I
Hmm.
mean, desperation also means that you can't really accept that your neighbor has a higher standard of living than you if you're suffering and if
yeah,
you're getting
Hmm.
desperate. And then you would think of it immediately, as most people will, and that it's unfair. What the hell did he do that I haven't done? How come
Hmm.
he has all this wealth that I don't have? And then if you're desperate, I mean, then you can't really blame people for when they're desperate to take things into their own hands and do things that are illegal. Especially, I mean, if desperation is sort of pushed on to them, uh, and you should expect it. I mean, I'm not saying it's justified in any sense, but I think it's pretty predictable that that's going to happen, and it's so much easier to have conflicts too. And I mean, I've sort of experienced this myself the past year or two in very small scale. No one has moved into my home or anything like that. I haven't been
Hmm.
in fist fights with my neighbors either. But I noticed that there's a whole lot of more road rage suddenly after the
Hmm.
pandemic. And I
Hmm.
mean, I don't drive differently now than I did a couple of years ago. And yeah, I have a European driver's license. So I don't drive like an American. I drive much more carefully. But it's I've received a lot of middle fingers, and I don't think I had even one before the pandemic. But the past couple of years, I've had a lot of people doing that, and people uh, following and then stopping next to me in red lights just to shout at me. And why? Well, usually I have no idea. There's nothing really happened. Or I just stopped a little too close to them at the red light or something like
Yeah.
that. I mean, nothing has actually happened, but
Mm-hmm.
I was not at least 6 feet away from their car when I stopped mine. It was only 4 or something like that. And then they get really pissed off, so pissed off that they have to follow me to the next red light and drive up next to me and start shouting at me, even if they have friends and family in their car, which
Mm-hmm.
tells me, it doesn't tell me that I'm suddenly a really bad driver, but it tells me that there is some sort of desperation going on, that they
Mm-hmm.
are under a lot of pressure, and therefore they are turning to this type of, I mean, this is not violence, but it's the type of rudeness that you that I
Mm-hmm.
didn't see before. Um, and this is sort of a way of venting, or I don't know. I mean, it's a psychological thing, I suppose, but because it's not really me they're after. They just have all this anger inside and this pressure building up. So
Yeah,
something is
you were
going
just
on.
yeah, you were just like yeah, you were just a catalyst to their anger, and I mean, you just happened to be there. So, I mean, psychology 101, they needed to let something loose, and you were the one that they let loose on. It's a shame that that happens, but yeah, I've noticed that too around here. I mean, extra extra recklessness anymore since post pandemic. Like I moved into a new house in like 2019, and I mean, people pretty much, yeah, it's right on a state highway, so the speed limit's 45. Most people respected that. And then by 10 o'clock at night, it's quiet because it's mostly residential along the state route with subdivisions along the way, like small little subdivision streets. But after the pandemic, I've noticed like more people are with louder cars, more people are just using it more like a raceway. And at 10 o'clock hits and it does not quiet down. Oh man, so I guess it to a certain extent, maybe that might be, maybe the 10 o'clock people are just racing away or going out on a late night vent or and just using racing as their venting, or maybe they're just working so long hours anymore that they're just trying to get home and it's late and there's nobody on the roads. But that's what I've noticed too. Like there has been a lot of road rage or recklessness. I mean, and even more so for being an American, especially in the greater Cincinnati area where we can't drive.
I can imagine it's probably has something to do with the even further depreciation of the dollar, everything getting more expensive. People have to work longer
Hmm.
hours, like Zach said. That definitely does add more tension to the environment that you're in.
Hmm.
Yeah, a lot of people are under a lot of pressure. And I mean,
Hmm.
there are a lot of people who are working a number of different jobs. And of course, those businesses are also forced to raise their prices, which means fewer people are buying their products, which means they can afford fewer people uh, to pay
Hmm.
them actually. And of course, whoever is paid still they need more jobs in order to buy the same things they did before. So, and it not, I mean, it's also the case that, well, after the pandemic, where we tried to pause the economy for for a
Yeah.
while,
Hmm.
this really stupid idea. Um, a lot of businesses just disappeared. A lot of the small businesses disappeared. And I
Hmm.
mean, that's where you have most of the job growth, is creating new small businesses, doing all kinds of
Hmm.
little things, and businesses doing sort of the boring stuff, the stuff that we all need, but that is not cool for a lot of people, like plumbing and construction
Hmm.
and what have you. A lot of those small businesses went under during the pandemic. Some of them got started again, but definitely not all of them. And I mean, who runs those small family businesses? Well, it's not the rich people who are not affected by prices all that much, who just say, "Oh, I'm just gonna buy this $80 bottle of wine. I'm gonna just go for the $50 bottle this week because
Mm-hmm.
I have less
Yeah.
cash." I mean, those are not the ones who had their own little business. So we're talking about middle class or working class who had their business, and those businesses are gone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then of course the sentiment anymore is tax the rich, and I mean, but who exactly are you going to tax when it comes to rich? I mean, the narrative says this and that, like everybody's angry at Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates, but in reality, like to tax the rich is really just going to tax those that are running businesses. Like, I mean, and those could be Joe Schmo off the street that's making $150,000 a year if he's lucky because his business is succeeding and thriving. So I think that's what it is in this country. I think they're trying to look at if you make more than two, like 150 to $200,000, you'll get taxed more or something. I think that's what I read, and that
Yeah,
hurts
and you
smaller
see also
people.
some of these reforms they call it, like in California, they're trying all this stuff, right? With an extra millionaires tax or whatever they call it.
Hmm.
And I mean, whoever has a home in California is basically a millionaire because homes are so expensive.
Oh yeah.
And then you have uh, the additional tax if you leave California. So if you
Yeah.
Mm,
if you
You
have
don't even
money,
live there.
yeah.
yeah, so right. You live there, you pay taxes, and then if you try to just say, screw this, I'm moving somewhere else, then they're gonna take a big chunk of your assets because you leave. And this seems to be uh, sort of a new thing that a lot of politicians are adopting, not only here in the US, but also other countries. I think Norway has a new uh, move out tax, so they will take a bunch of your
Hmm.
capital if you leave the country and things like that. I mean, that's definitely going to harm all of us in the long run if capital can't move across state or national uh, borders, because capital
Hmm.
needs to go where it's most productive, of course.
Yeah. Do you
Yeah.
believe that oh, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead, Andrew.
I would say
I've talked a lot.
oh no, you're fine. Do you believe that it's a futile effort to get citizenship abroad in situations where, say, the economy does capitulate, or do you think you know it isn't something that worth to invest in the long term?
Well, I mean, as an American, you're basically screwed for the simple reason that
Hmm.
it doesn't matter where you live or where you make your money, you still have to report it to the IRS.
Hmm.
Um, And I mean, the IRS has imposed all kinds of regulations on banks and in other countries. So I mean, the IRS is sort of ruling the world in the sense, or
Hmm.
in that sense. And I mean, even if you give up your American citizenship, you're going to have to report your income to the IRS for another 10 years. That's the
Yeah.
law. So uh, in that sense, you're screwed as an American. But I would still say that having several passports is not a bad idea.
Hmm.
And spread them around a little bit and be able to go to different places. I mean, I know the law of the land is also that the U.S. government does not um, uh, they do not recognize dual citizenship. I think that's how they call it. But that what that
Hmm.
means is not that you can't have other passports or citizenships. It's just that the U.S. government is going to consider you an American. End of story,
Hmm.
right? Uh, so you can't to the American government as an American claim that, well, I'm also a citizen of Chad or whatever,
Hmm.
because they're just going to say, no, you're an American. We don't give a damn, right? And
Hmm.
in a sense, that's the same way that the Chinese government, I think, is treating Chinese. That even if you're a dual citizen, they're not going to accept that you use the other government's diplomacy services or what have you. You're still you're under
Hmm.
Chinese rule because you're Chinese. But you can still, I mean, you can still go to other countries and live in other countries, and many other countries require that you're a citizen there. more passports means that you're freer to travel. I mean, it's also hard to get citizenship in other countries unless you go to like Liberland or something, but that's not going to help you a whole lot.
Yeah.
But many countries allow you to stay as on sort of a nomadic visa, so you can stay there for 3 to 6 months maybe and work, and then you move to the next country and stay there 3 to 6 months and work, and so you can sort of have that lifestyle. So you don't have to be a citizen to be in other countries, and that's an option for a lot of people too, especially now when you can do most things like we're doing now virtually or digitally.
Yeah, and that's what I've read, and also because we're very astute to like Andrew Henderson and Nomad Capitalist, and so shout out to him. This is how we got into it was like, but I think like Malta has something where like you can go in and get, you don't even have to get like citizenship, like you get some sort of residency type deal, and then you can get like a dual passport where you're obviously set to like go across all of the EU freely, and then you can get like a passport system where you can go elsewhere, and as long as you just come back like you said for like, yeah, I think you have to come back or present some sort of asset like at least 3 to 6 months out of the year just to keep it like intact. But I mean, it's very interesting on how this nomadic like lifestyle of passport dual citizenship type deal is like coming to the forefront nowadays, as most of our governments in the West are becoming a little bit more centralized and totalitarian in their policies.
Yeah, I know a lot of governments have instituted these nomadic visas just to sort of take advantage of the fact that so many people are working from home, which means they can work from wherever they call home, as long as they have an
Mm-hmm.
internet connection, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then offering foreigners to just come and work here and just pay a little bit in tax, and then you're free.
Mm-hmm.
You can just stay here for half a year or a year or whatever. A lot of countries
Mm-hmm.
are doing that, which of course is a very promising development, because it frees a lot of people from their own nation states chains. I mean, Americans again are in a bad situation because you would still have to report your income in that country to IRS, whereas
Mm-hmm.
I think the international treaties are such that I think Sweden, because I'm a dual citizen, Sweden follows those treaties, and what the treaty says is that as a standard, if you're 6 months in a year in some other country and you pay taxes there, you don't report to your home country.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're 12 months or more in some other country, whether or not you pay taxes there, you don't report to your home country.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for the US, of course, you have to report everything.
So denounce U.S. citizenship. Check
Yeah, and
once.
wait 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, wait 10 years. Yeah. Yeah, that's a shame that the American empire has just grown too much and too far and too strong, and all these regulations, and it's not even law. Like the IRS is not even law. It's in their coding, and we're just following what is not even legal to the standards of the Constitution. So that's why Lysander Spinner.
No treason. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Do you believe that
So
the capitulation is on the horizon?
Capitulation of the government, you mean?
Of this in general, the central banks, the government, you know.
I don't think they intend to. I mean, that's that's pretty obvious that they're going to take more and more power the
Yeah.
more they can. Um, I mean, do I think it's sustainable? No, I don't. I mean, economically speaking, it's not. They're
Yeah.
just causing more and more distortions to the economy, which means that we get poorer and poorer, relatively speaking. So, I mean, where would we have
mhm.
been without the Fed for the past 100 years? Well, we would have a whole lot of more wealth and prosperity, which
Hmm.
includes such things as maybe a cure for cancer and what have you. Who knows?
Hmm.
And we wouldn't have an enormous oppressive government. We wouldn't have an international empire. We wouldn't waste all this money on bombing people in foreign countries and all this stuff. I mean, none of
Hmm.
that would happen. So I mean, we would have more resources for that reason alone, and we would have more entrepreneurship and more production. So I mean, uh, the counterfactual is very promising, right? Or what we lost is a lot.
Hmm.
So I mean, right now, I mean, MMT, modern monetary theory, seems to be all the rage, and that would be I guess that would be a shortcut towards final implosion of the system.
Speaking of MMT, why is that becoming such a rage, and why do people think that your tax dollars are what props up the dollar?
Yeah, I don't know to what extent people actually believe in that sort of chartalist thing that people
Yeah.
only accept dollars because they have to pay taxes with them. I mean, we'll see now. I mean, with states
Mm.
saying that, oh, you can pay your taxes in whatever you feel like gold or whatever.
Hmm.
That
Hmm.
should mean then that you don't actually need dollars to pay taxes. Does that mean that people are gonna stop using dollars because they're worth zero? No, it's not.
Mm. No.
That's not the case. So I mean, it's a ridiculous argument, and and it's just a way for them to make a circular argument so that it is persuasive for themselves. But
Hmm.
it's a stupid argument. And
Hmm.
it's not how the dollar or any national currency was national fiat currency was introduced either. I mean, we had dollars, but it was connected to, and it was a pretty pure gold standard to begin with. And then, of course, step by
Hmm.
step, they sort of weakened the tie between the dollar and, or the paper dollar and the actual backing until in the early 1970s when they completely uh, just cut those ties. And of course, people are going to continue using the same paper bills that
Hmm.
they can't go to the bank and get gold for them anymore. Well, they didn't actually do that before either, even though they could, and that was the real
Hmm.
money. So of course they're going to continue using it. It's not that they suddenly in 1913 said that, oh, look at that, income tax. Well, I have to use the paper money now. No, that didn't happen. That's,
Hmm.
that's not what happened at all. So I mean, it's a it's a silly argument that doesn't doesn't work out at all historically and doesn't work out theoretically either, even though they will claim that it does. But I've had MMTers claim that there never was gold, never was money either, because money was created by the government, and money was always by the government, and that's how they define money. I mean, that's okay. Well, you can define the moon as a cheese. That doesn't make the moon a cheese,
Hmm.
but it's just ridiculous. I mean, the level of thinking among MMTers is among the lowest I have encountered, I think. Um, I mean, if you take a bunch of them, a couple of dozen of them, I'm sure they're going to reach uh, average intelligence combined. But it's a lot of nonsense, and it really is a deepity at the core of it. I mean, it's not a theory. It's not an explanation. It's at best a description of how the government handles money. But then they always add a lot of extra stuff that doesn't fit with it, and just just to in order to think or pretend and present it as a theory of the economy, and it's not.
Yeah, it's almost like the flat earther theory, pretty much. It's just kind of convoluting a conclusion out of something that you really don't know much about with all the other evidence in front of you, and you just ignore. It's like flat earthers believe the earth is flat and we live under a dome, but all the evidence of physics is around you that correspond to the opposite of your idea. but yet you're still stuck into a mold. It's almost like MMT as well as like the flat earth. It would be like a psyop if we want to go into conspiracy land. So like
Right.
they want us to be dumb.
Right, and I've been
Yeah.
actually been starting to wonder about the psyop thing with MMT, because there are a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people. I mean, I spent some time on X or Twitter
Mm-hmm.
trying to spread sound economics, and MMTers. Whenever I talk about money, not necessarily about MMT, but about money, I get a lot of MMTers, and they have in the beginning. I mean, I still argue with them quite a bit, but they are enormously economically illiterate. So they don't understand even the very basics. I mean, I've had
Mm-hmm.
people say, ask me, well, what do you actually mean by opportunity cost? And you go, holy crap. I mean, what, where do we start? Well, opportunity cost, obviously. But I'm wondering how many of those are not actually bots, because they're saying pretty much the same thing and using the same words.
Mm.
They rarely discuss the actual issues. They always miss any nuance or specificity. Uh, they make the same logical fallacies, and they
Mm-hmm.
have, uh, I mean, they parrot the same sort of slogans instead of arguments. And they're very quick, of course, to do ad hominems, um,
Mm.
which I'm happy to give back to them as well. But and very many of them also have, I mean, they have profiles that they're basically the same, and they're a little bit generic. So I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure there
Mm-hmm.
are people who believe in MMT. I mean, that's beyond a doubt, I think. And I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
I have discussed with some of them too, but there's this a mass of MMTers that doesn't make any sense as actual people. On the other hand, I mean, many people in social media fail the Turing test. So it wouldn't surprise me if there are bots that sort of pass the Turing test.
Mm-hmm. Well, that and you got AI and Chat GPT too. So like somebody could just be going in typing MMT and then it's just giving them everything that it searches on the internet and then they're just copying and pasting too. So I
Yeah,
mean,
right.
not a whole lot of critical thinking, I guess, in our modern information age. So much information, and yet I think that's where we're at a quandary. Is there's so much information that we can gather that we just forget that it's out there. So we just mimic.
Yeah, it's easy to get stuck in your own thinking and then find others who have
Hmm.
the same terrible thinking,
Hmm.
and never learn. And I think I wrote a piece at Mises.org about this, actually, about social media, that the tone is so
Hmm.
hostile and angry and nasty. And I don't think that is because it's so easy to express yourself or communicate, because it's not the case that people suddenly became really nasty when we went from no telephone to telephone. So it's not just that it's so easy to do that or to be anonymous. I mean, you could in the early days you could easily place a phone call without the receiver knowing who called, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Uh, so so were people really nasty then? No, they weren't. So it's not really the technology and the possibility that does it, but I think to a large extent, it's really the hyper democratization of
Hmm.
social discourse, in the sense
Hmm.
that, well, everybody has a vote, and even if you don't know anything about politics, everybody will tell you that, well, you have to vote. It's your duty to vote. You should vote because you need to have an opinion, whether or not it has any basis whatsoever. And that never made sense to me at all, that if I know exactly who to vote for, assuming I vote, but I don't, of course. Um, but and then why would I, if I've looked at the arguments and considered the candidates, why would I encourage someone who doesn't know shit about it to vote and potentially just vote on the other side so that my vote doesn't count anymore? That doesn't make any sense at all, right? And we go through school and everybody's encouraged to have their opinion, but you're
Hmm.
not really encouraged to have a wise or thoughtful or intelligent opinion just to have an opinion. So when I teach, I try to have a lot of interaction with the students, and I ask them their opinions, of course, but then I always ask them why. And it's usually very difficult for them to express why. Very often it says, well, that's what I think. Well, I don't give a damn. I want to know how you reasoned your way to that opinion, or how you back it up, because having an opinion, you can say whatever the heck you want, right? And for that reason, that every opinion counts, I think people in social media have an urge to just express their opinion. And they're really upset if people express other opinions, because it challenges them and they don't really have a basis for their opinion. And I mean, the one example of this is sort of hilarious, that when I discuss economics with people on X, after a little bit, obviously people check my handle and my profile after a few back and forth, and not in the beginning. So when they do, and they see that I'm a professor, their response is usually, and this is like a typical response when they disagree with me on something that is definitely within my expertise, they'll say, well, you should know better as a professor. I'm like, well, maybe I do. Maybe that was the thing, right? We've been butting heads a little bit, arguing. You have one opinion, I have a different opinion. This is my area of expertise. So it's actually an opinion that is based on a lot of research or science or theory or whatever you want to call it. And this other guy has this random opinion and then figures out that I'm a professor. And then he or she wins points by claiming that I'm stupid as the professor, I should know better, because their opinion is equally valid as mine. Or at least that's how I interpret it, that is sort of this hyper democratization and thinking that every man a vote and every opinion counts just as much, and that sort of crap, which is obviously not the case in the real world, quote unquote.
Yeah, I mean, echo chambers are nice and to a certain extent, no, I mean, but at the same time, it kind of regurgitates like all the wrongdoing of our society, all that wrong think. I mean, just too much collectivism into one's area just kind of gravitates towards stupidity. Yeah, I don't know what else to say, just stupidity. I mean, and people just need to learn that everybody has a perspective, everybody has an opinion, and not everybody's opinion is right. Like somebody's going to be smarter than somebody else at something else. I mean, it's no different from like being a car mechanic. Like I don't know anything about cars, so I'm not going to try to work on it myself. I'm going to go to my mechanic, but my neighbor might be somebody that actually knows how to redo an engine block. I mean, drop a new carburetor in and actually maintain their vehicle. And then maybe in a voluntary free society, maybe which we already live in, if we actually put our mind in, maybe you'll go to your neighbor and say, hey, can you help me out? And next thing you know, you build a relationship, and then they're working on your car, and you're not spending all that money at the mechanic. So, but
yeah, and guess what? You can
that's
even offer them payment, maybe not in dollars.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Then you have yeah,
You can't accurately develop context for whatever you're doing unless you actually have skin in the game. So if you're associating and helping them out, you're learning as you're going, and that goes back to the conversation you was talking about on X.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean that is a problem for people in my line of business, professors. I mean, we study a lot of things, but do we have skin in the game with what we're studying? Not really. But on the other hand, a random dude in social media who has an opinion on the same thing also doesn't have any skin in the game. So
unless they have some type of business, but I contend that nobody really has any business on X. A lot of people are just on X.
Yeah.
Bored in their
Farm.
cubicle job, which is fine. But I mean, at the same time, I mean, you're allowed to have your argue and debate, but I mean, don't make shit up. I mean, you're bored at your office job, not doing anything. I worked security at Fidelity of all places for a while. I've seen these people in the cubicles. They're bored. While they're in between phone calls, they're playing on their phone, probably arguing with Pear on X about MMT.
Might be.
So they might be. So, but yeah, that's it is it's intriguing, the society that we live in today. And we just and the civil discourse that we no longer have. I think that's what we're missing is the discourse. I mean, we're not ready to agree to disagree. And I think like 20 years ago, we were able to at least agree to disagree. And then like you could have your liberal friends with your conservative friends, and then your libertarian friends, and then the anarchists. Nowadays, we're all just in our own little space.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it happened pretty quickly too, that people just
Hmm.
started weeding out people for ideological reasons. People have been like childhood friends. So you've been friends
Hmm.
with them for 40 years or whatever, and then you go like, "Oh, wait a minute. You're a Republican or you're a Democrat? No way. I
Hmm.
mean, I'm gonna block you. I'm never gonna I'm gonna take your number out of my phone, or well, probably block the person and all this stuff that
Hmm.
so we're not seeing the people anymore, which is terrible.
It is very terrible. So I think we're coming in on the hour and a half mark there, Andrew. So
I believe so,
you
yeah.
have anything you want to add? Any questions, concerns, or
Uh,
just rebuttals?
just
Prepare.
it would seem that divergence is becoming more and more realistic in today's society, so we have to be prepared. That's basically my observation.
Hmm. So I mean, again, I mean, all wonderful informational stuff. I'm glad that you were able to come on and join us, Pear. It was great having you, and thank you again so for coming on. Um, while we jump in and end this, and would love to have you back if you'd
Sure,
have
absolutely.
us. So we could probably go like days on end, and it'd be a long
Let's not do
recording. So
that. No, I have
yeah,
other things to
yeah,
do.
yeah. So, but if you would like to come back on, that would be awesome. But
Absolutely. Yeah.
so, but uh, anyway, if you want to plug away, obviously you're on X, so anywhere else that you can uh plug out for people to follow you or chit chat with you or argue about MMT.
Yeah, I mean, as long as they're not bots, I would be happy to argue with them. I think X is probably the place to
Hmm.
find me. I mean, there are plenty of lectures and articles and even books available online as well that can be downloaded and read and listened to and whatnot.
And of course, Mises.org, so they can find all your information on there, being a senior fellow there and being so. Um, but I say let's reel it in and give everybody back their day for after this hour and a half of uh good conversation. So, Andrew, you got anything last to say?
Just thank you very much for joining us today, sir. It was a real pleasure.
It was so thank you again, Per Bylund. All of his information will be in our description, and follow him on X and join the conversation. So and get his book, specifically his latest book, The Primer, that's been out for a couple of years. So which you can get for free on Mises.org in ebook form or audiobook. So but in the with that, I am the legacy of Jennifer and Kaiser. This is the legacy, right? He's Andrew Joseph, and y'all have a wonderful day, evening, week, month, whenever you listen to this. Hopefully you enjoy it. So like and subscribe, and that's about it. So
Thanks for
have a
watching.
good day.